What's up, college football fans? Tony Valente here once again with the Mean Green Show, joined again by CJ Olson, going to recap this SMU Nevada game. Guys, you already know the drill. If you're a fan of college football, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. CJ, initial thoughts from the game.
Not good, Snowy. About as bad as it could be without being a loss. That was, oh man. So like we talked about it, like with the spread, like, oh, if it's 24 versus 27, what do you do? Basically, like halfway through the second quarter, I thought, okay, we just got to get out of here with a win. Like, there's no question about like, is SMU going to cover? Are we going to get to see both quarterbacks some more? Like, the only way that we were going to see any sort of, multi-quarterback system was intentional. And obviously Kevin Jennings did get a couple of drives. I'm sure we'll discuss that some, but yeah, I was expecting for Kevin Jennings to get like the entire fourth quarter. And that didn't end up happening because of how close this game ended up being. And man, it was a very undisciplined game. It was just across the board, not great. There were very few bright spots. I'm sure we can get into some of the couple of bright spots that there were, though.
Oh, sure. So, okay, but starting off on the quarterback situation, I listened to Coach Lashley's his press conference, and he said in his conference that it was told that I believe it was the third and fourth drive that Kevin Jennings was already, regardless of what happened, good or bad, he was going to get. Anyway, it was two drives. I think it was a third and fourth drive, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So that was scripted or whatever, like that was planned, and he got those two drives, whichever drives they were, and he goes 4 for 5 for 54 yards. I mean, he's not pushing the ball crazily down the field, but the offense seems to be moving pretty well. Were you surprised that he didn't come back in?
No, only because I think that that's kind of a small sample to say that because he was able to push the ball through the two drives. I mean, I definitely think that Kevin did a good job in those two drives. I mean, the first drive, the turnover on downs, I believe, and then the second drive, the first of three touchdown drives in the entire game, or 4 touchdown drives in the entire game. No, 3. Oh God, that sounds so sad to say. No, I mean, I think that, he did a good job, but I'm not surprised to see that Stone being the starting quarterback. I just think that it would have taken a drastically bad performance from Stone. And I think he started incredibly rocky, but I think it would have taken significantly even worse of a performance to say, yeah, you know what, the guy that we named a starter going into the season who has started last season and has thrown for however many thousand yards with SMU and has been, a multi-time captain and has been here for going on now 4 years. Like, it would take a really, really bad performance to be like, yeah, we're going to go to the backup now, regardless of the fact that the backup has a C on his chest, regardless of the fact that the backup got SMU their first scoring drive of the season. I think that it just would have been a very drastic situation. I think now knowing that it was scripted makes me feel a little bit better. I was a little concerned when it was like, okay, 2 drives in, we're already like, what does that do to a quarterback's confidence if 2 drives in, you get yanked, and then the next guy comes in, and then 2 drives later, that guy gets pulled? The fact that it was scripted makes me feel a little bit better, but at the same time, it makes me wonder, like, what are we doing? Like, why? Like, I understand. I also read Coach Lashley's quotes, and like, I get it from his perspective, but that felt more so like maybe a strategy you employ against an FCS team, perhaps, or maybe once you've already, got the win in hand, maybe sooner than you would normally pull that trigger. Early in the season say, okay, when this game gets to 3 scores, we give Kevin a few drives. And then if he can capitalize on that, then we just let him stay out there. I don't know necessarily drives 3 and 4. I mean, what happens if Nevada scores on drives 1 and 2 and it's 14-0 and you pull the starting quarterback? Like, that's where the predetermined thing, like, I get it. And it makes me feel a little better based on what actually happened. But in theory, I think that there's a lot of ways that could have gone wrong, and it was a little concerning.
Another thing Coach Lashley said, staying on the quarterback topic for a little bit, he kind of doubled down from the standpoint of, we have 2 quarterbacks, we're going to play them both. And, it doesn't really, rarely does it work out well that there's 2 quarterbacks, for the entirety of a year that are getting, maybe a 75-25 split. So do you think this is a move to try to retain Jennings for years to come? I mean, I think on the field, he's a sophomore, and on the field, Stone is a junior. So, I mean, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, do you think it's a retainment move? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think okay, so the players vote for the captains. So Kevin Jennings is incredibly well respected by the team. I feel like that's pretty self-evident based on the fact that he was voted a captain. So I don't know necessarily that we can say it is as much a retention move as it appeared before he was named a captain. Now, two quarterback systems, as you said, rarely work. I mean, it reminds me of the Arrested Development scene, where one character is like, well, did it work for those people? And then another character goes, no, it never does. I mean, these people somehow delude themselves into thinking it might, but it might work for us. And it's like, they get so close to understanding that, like, no, this never works. But if you look at this specific situation, maybe we're the exception to the rule. And so for all we know, it'll work. I mean, I would love for it to work because that means good things for SMU, and I prefer good things for SMU. Um, but yeah, I don't necessarily remember all of your questions there, but I feel I feel like that Jennings could have gone somewhere, chose not to. Um, and I feel like the fact that he's a captain shows that he's committed to the program's committed to him. So I'm not so sure that it's necessary to retain him. I mean, I'm sure it helps, but
Right. Last thing about quarterbacks. So I want to get your take on Preston Stone. Share mine really quick. Watched him play in high school. You know, I've grown up in Texas, watched a lot of Texas high school football, played whatever, seen a lot of Texas high school quarterbacks. Preston Stone is really one of the better ones I've seen in high school, and you know, he's his game in college, taking the Nevada game out of it, has been really good as well. And you know, he was in the same league or conference as Shadir Sanders, and in high school, I mean, it wasn't even close. Preston Stone was ahead above Shadur in high school, just from my eyes. A lot of people, again, like the media or whatever you want to call them, people that cover it. I don't know how closely they cover SMU, but it's they've kind of wrote him off already. But what are your thoughts on Stone? I mean, do you feel confident in him moving forward? I mean, are you still on the Stone train? What are your thoughts there?
yeah. So I definitely haven't given up on Stone. I think that part of it is with the like a lot of the Lashley system is basically just variants of four verts. And I think that what Stone does best is extend plays, improvise, and let it rip. And I think that the system does allow for that really well. And so I think that he does have a higher ceiling than we've seen, which is kind of crazy to say considering he was like the PFF's like top or second top rated quarterback of the returning QBs from last year. And that was only his first full season as a starter. So, I mean, I do believe, I mean, there were some people that were, you know, this offseason, there was a lot of discourse of like, is there a quarterback competition, just to go back to that conversation again. And I feel like, you know, from what we've seen from Stone, I think he has the potential to be essentially the best modern SMU quarterback ever. As long as, you know, he stays however many years he needs to put up the counting stats. But I think in terms of raw talent, I do think he's got the most arm talent of anybody that we've seen at SMU. I think that in the system he's in, it kind of allows him to play to his strengths. So I mean, yeah, I'm still on the Stone train all the way. I mean, I think that this game, the more time that's gone on, just to, you know, kind of expand a little bit to the game in general, you know, a certain coach that's now residing more so in Fort Worth will say, used to always say after games that wins, well, good games, when you look back on them and you really break it down, aren't as good as you remember them in the moment. And bad games are not as bad when you look back on them as they felt in the moment. And I think that when I look through a lot of the numbers and I get into some of the PFF grades and I look at, you know, individual plays that were big momentum swings, it makes me feel a lot more optimistic long term, especially knowing how many people have now written SMU off, especially um, in terms of like the national media. Like I'm perfectly comfortable to kind of go back to letting the team figure this out on their own without, you know, the scrutiny of everybody saying that. I mean, SMU and Virginia Tech were the two ACC dark horse picks basically coming into the season. And so it's nice to know that there are people that are now saying, okay, well, they're frauds. They're not actually dark horse contenders. Let's bail on that assumption altogether. One game into the season, having not played an ACC opponent. So that being said, still super high on Stone. I still think that, from what I've seen, I know that he can bounce back. One thing about the system that isn't ideal is I feel like when the lows are low, they're really low. And I think that kind of showed itself in the first half, especially with Stone basically throwing 4 or 5 passes that hit the hands of a defender. It's obviously week 0, so, there's going to be some rust, but again, those lows get really low. So hopefully works that out.
Without getting too emotional and going too long, but just touching on a few things, what are your biggest concerns for SMU going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I said coming into the game, you said if somehow Nevada pulls off the upset, and boy, was I confident that they had no chance of that. I said that for both sides of the ball, it started on the interior of the offensive and defensive line, respectively. And frankly, I was fairly underwhelmed with both of our lines, especially the interior portion of the defensive line. I felt like there was, a lot of talk going into the season about how it was incredibly deep. And it felt to me like we had a bunch of depth, but we weren't actually we weren't rotating guys who were making difference-making plays on a down-to-down basis. And I still like a lot of the guys that got brought in. So I'm certainly not selling off that stock yet. But I think that I just maybe more so appropriately priced it coming into the season than some people did. And after I, did the pregame preview with you, I had somebody reach out to me and be like, I actually think you're wrong on the fact that the defensive line is the biggest question mark. I think, when you look at all of these facts, they're going to be one of the strongest units. And not a single interior defensive lineman graded out as above average on PFF against a team projected to win 2 games in the Mountain West this year. So that's where, when I say they were a question mark going into the season, still are. The interior of the defensive line, they've got their work cut out for them to improve after going forward for the rest of the season. And then on the offensive line as well, I felt like Justin Osborne had a solid game. His PFF grade didn't really reflect that, but I never really felt like he made any big mistakes that I could see. And I was really spending a lot of time watching the offensive line during the game. And then at right tackle, Nate Anderson had a tough game. I felt like he was just kind of getting overpowered. And that's not what you want to see again from, a Nevada team that's not expected to do much. So yeah, those are the big things I want to see improvements on throughout the rest of the season.
Some positive takeaways from you from the Nevada game.
Brashard Smith, RJ Maryland. How about them? I mean, Brashard Smith, 11 carries, 67 yards, but it felt like, he had a long of 20. So that's 10 carries for 47 yards on the non-long of the day, which is kind of a rough way that I like to see, on a down-to-down basis. How did they do? It felt like he was a lot more explosive in the rushing game than averaging just under 5 on his, when factoring out the 20-yard rush. But that being said, I felt very good about Brashard Smith. And then RJ Maryland, this guy, 8 catches, 162 yards, and the game-winning touchdown. Coming into the season, anybody that would listen, I was telling people that RJ Maryland's going to be one of the best tight ends in the country this year. You could see it a little bit last year as a true sophomore, that he was really going to be a difference maker going forward. I think coming into the game, I said, is a wide receiver 1 going to step up? I would still love for a wide receiver 1 to step up because, the second leading receiver was Roderick Daniels Jr. with 3 catches for 28 yards with a long of 23, and that long of 23 was on a pop pass. So in other words, then after that were 2 running backs. And then next was Keyshawn Smith with 1 catch for 20 yards. So no wide receivers stepped up this game at all. And so that is a little concerning, but RJ Maryland ceiling sky high for that guy.
Yeah, 6'4", about 240. You think he's got a legit shot at football beyond college as far as the NFL goes specifically?
Yeah, so I think based on his genetic pedigree, being the son of Russell Maryland, and the fact that his production numbers are going to be crazy good, I think are going to be well in his favor. But I do want to point out, and this is an example I just thought of off the top of my head, so there might be some flaws in it. But Thaddeus Moss went to LSU, son of Randy Moss, put up great numbers on that 2019 team. Felt like everybody on that 2019 team went in the first round. Thaddeus Moss went undrafted. Now, granted, there are plenty of people that go on to be, stars that go undrafted. But I haven't heard Moss's name in a long time. So I'm going to guess that he did not get to play too much after college. So the 6'4", 240, I think I would need to see where that like stacks up tight end wise. It doesn't sound too undersized. I think it's going to come down to essentially how fast he runs in the different, combine based movement events between 40 shuttle. If they have him doing the 3 cone, whatever combination of things they have him do. If he shows, some good agility, some good acceleration, some good speed, I could see him. Yeah, I could see him playing on Sundays. I don't see why not.
What will you be looking for in this HCU game, Houston Christian, when they come to the Hilltop? And really, can anything be gathered from, I guess, like if they light the world on fire, I mean, will that make you feel any better being that, the level of opponent they're playing? But just what are some things you'll be looking for?
Yeah, so like you had asked me previously, like, was I worried about Stone or like, am I still high on him? I'm not even going to be really paying attention to what he does against Houston Christian. I think for me, uh, what I'm going to be looking for going into this game is actually going to be what do they do running the ball compared to like what should be expected. So there were a lot of times on, with 3 down linemen, 2 linebackers in the box, they were averaging like 4 yards a carry. That's really bad. To basically have even numbers, sometimes better if you have, Stoney be at H back or you have a tight end in line. Like the fact that you have +1 blocking and are still averaging less than 4 yards per carry, that was really a big concern to me because Nevada is an undersized defensive line. Especially, I mean, they're going to be the smallest FBS defensive line we're going to see all season. And the fact that we couldn't really create any running lanes is concerning. And that's something I want to see against Houston Christian. I don't expect them to light the world on fire as far as running the ball goes, but I want to see when they do present 5-man boxes and we run the ball, I want to see that we pick up 7-8 yards on the play at a minimum. That sort of a thing, once adjusting for the fact that they're FCS, like that, I think has to be the standard. And that's really what I care about.
Okay, we've stayed a little bit longer than I promised I'd keep you. So I'm not going to dive too much into the ACC, but just a few questions really quick. I'll just try to throw them to you in a 3-stack here. Can a 2-loss FSU team make the playoffs?
Yes.
There you go. Who is your favorite to win the conference after week 0, being that 3 ACC schools have played? And lastly, do you feel like that Georgia Tech FSU game was more praise should be given to Georgia Tech for winning that game, or more fault should be put on FSU for losing that game?
I think more fault needs to go to FSU for losing the game. I think that with Georgia Tech and the Haynes King experience, we know what Haynes King is. He is very high risk, very high reward. As good as Haynes King played this past weekend, he's going to have like a 3-interception game where they either outright lose to a much worse team or play way down to a much worse team. And that's no knock on Haynes King. That's just, I feel like that's been the book on Haynes King since he's got to Georgia Tech and before when he was at A&M. I think that my favorite in the conference is going to be if Louisville's quarterback can stay healthy. I think that I really like what they're doing. I really like the roster. Virginia Tech, I think, kind of has an outside shot, depending on if Kyron Jones kind of takes a step, sort of what he showed in the second half of last season. But I think ultimately I'm going to go with Miami. I think that Miami has the most talented roster. And I think that in the long run, I'm going to bet on talent, even though I know that there's been a lot made about Mario Cristobal as an in-game coach. I still think I would lean Miami.
CJ, I appreciate it. I hope you can get to bed quickly. I know it's a bit later in Miami where you are located currently, but good luck. I'm sure we'll talk soon, and I'm excited to see how this ACC shakes out.
Thank you. Likewise.